Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'm the Vice Chair filling in for the Chair, Ian Rankin. I'm the MLA for Timberlea Prospect. And before we begin, I would ask that all cell phones be placed on silent or vibrate. And we will start with the introduction of members, starting with Ms. Lonescroft.
Suzanne Lonescroft, constituency of Lunenburg.
Margaret Miller, Hants East.
Joachim Stroink, Halifax, Shabakta.
Good morning. My name is Tim Houston. I'm the MLA for Pictou East.
Dave Wilson, MLA for Sackville-Cobequid.
Okay, today on the agenda is the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation, here to discuss financial update and the structure of the corporation. And I'd like to have the introduction of the witnesses.
Heather McDougall, Director of Policy and Public Affairs.
Brett Mitchell, the President and CEO.
Dave DiPersio, VP Finance and IT.
Okay, so we'll start now with opening remarks from the witnesses. Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, and good morning. Thank you for inviting us here today to provide you with an update on our performance. Joining me today is Dave DiPersio, our Vice President of Finance and IT, and Heather McDougall, our Director of Policy and Public Affairs and our Corporate Secretary. Both are members of our executive team, and they're here to answer any of the really tough questions that you might have. The NSLC is having a strong year in relative terms to both our planned results and in comparison to some of our most recent trends. Despite long-term challenges within the Nova Scotia economy, we've worked hard to continue delivering value to the province as well as to our customers. In fact, over the last 5 years, we've grown our income from operations from $219 million in 2009 to $228.2 million this past fiscal year, or $230.5 million in comprehensive income basis. That represents an improvement of $11.2 million annually per year and $6.2 million, or almost 3% over the prior year, despite a soft economy, challenging population demographics, and changing consumption patterns. We've achieved this growth in several strategic ways. We are moving our customers towards more premium products that deliver a greater return for the corporation. We're using innovative programs and systems to better engage and connect with our customers and build those relationships. And we continue to revamp our store network to better serve our communities. We've expanded our agency store network to better serve underserviced rural areas. We've become champions of local products and local industry, and we're focused on controlling costs while we make strategic investments. By all accounts, these strategies appear to be working. This year, despite a $2.7 million decline in sales in the first half, net income is $2.8 million over plan. So even though we're selling less, we continue to drive more value to our bottom line by effectively managing product margin, assortment mix, and controlling costs. Overall, customer transactions, our measure of customer purchases, were down 2.1%. However, the average dollar value of each transaction grew by 1.7%. Through strong category management execution, significant gains were made in improving our gross margin, increased from 54.5% to 55%. As a result, even though sales are down compared to last year, gross margin has grown by $218,000. Payroll and benefits, by far our largest expense, have increased $437,000, or 1.5%. But given the general wage rate increase of 3%, we've been effectively managing labor hours and headcount to minimize our overall expense growth. Our non-payroll expenses have decreased by $217,000, or 1.1%, with savings achieved across several categories. And we monitor our performance in a number of ways. We compare ourselves to other Canadian liquor boards and other private sector retailers. And when you examine key performance indicators, the NSLC trends favorably. We know our performance is not driven by consumption. Nova Scotia is 9th amongst the 10 provinces in terms of volume per capita consumption, and 12th out of 13th if you include the 3 territories. And consumption has been falling steadily since 2009. Simply put, it's not consumption that's driving our profitability, but smart investments and cost effectiveness. In terms of consumer trends, the NSLC continues to see declines in beer and spirit sales, which is consistent with trends across North America. However, more recently, we've been able to counter those declines, specifically in beer, with gains in our ready-to-drink category, which was up 19.5%, thanks in part to another record-breaking year in ciders. Growth in local products is now seen as a key driver, not only for our brand, but for future revenue growth as well. In the past 6 months alone, Nova Scotia wine sales are up 5.7% to $6.5 million. Sales of Nova Scotia ciders increased 66%. To almost 600,000, and sales of Nova Scotia craft beer were up 28.8% to $2.7 million. This growth has led to an important and growing sector of the Nova Scotia economy. Currently, the NSLC partners with 19 farm and cottage wineries, 16 microbrews and 5 brew pubs, 7 distilleries, 3 commercial wineries, and 2 commercial breweries. Combined, these businesses contribute millions to the local economy and employ hundreds of Nova Scotians, and the NSLC is pleased to be an active participant in their economic development. Our contributions to these industries would not be possible without the performance of our robust network of 105 retail stores and 60 agency stores. We also procure the product for the region's 4 private wine stores and supply the restaurants and bars. But the combination of these 2 retail channels constitutes almost 90% of our business, and they are basically flat to last year in sales. We do these things always in rein and balance with our legislated mandates. They are the promotion of social objectives around responsible drinking, the promotion of economic objectives regarding the beverage alcohol industry, the attainment of suitable financial revenue for government, and attainment of acceptable levels of customer service, all the while operating as a viable commercial enterprise. Looking ahead to the second half of 2014-15 fiscal year, we continue to look for new ways to innovate, drive margin, and carefully manage expenses. We are forecasting that by doing so, we will exceed our target of net income for the year. Now, I'd be more than pleased to try to answer your questions. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start with the PC caucus for 20 minutes. Mr. Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that introduction there. I might have to circle back to some of it. There's a lot of statistics there. But I think you said the gross margin is about 55% right now, and I'm just wondering how that compares to other Crown corporations.
Mr. Mitchell.
Across the country that are in the same business as you.
Across the country?
Would it be on par, or would it be, I think, like Newfoundland and...
Well, the numbers, I'll get Dave to pull out the actual numbers for you, but in terms of our ranking, we're 3rd highest in terms of gross margin across the country.
3rd highest across the country, okay. Okay, now how does the NSLC's overall profitability compare to similar Crown corporations across the country?
You know, it's a wonderful question. It's very difficult to compare them exactly because we all have such very different models across the country. The measure that I like to use is volume per capita per liter consumed, and at that level we're number 2 in the country in terms of contribution.
Number 2 most profitable?
Yes.
Okay. I was just looking at the income statement there. So for the most recent year published, the bottom line profit is about 38% of net sales.
Yes.
And I did do a quick calculation. Well, obviously that means that 62% goes to cost of product and all other overhead. So has that 38% profitability, is that kind of steady over the last few years?
Yes, it's been flat around that level for a long time. Over 10 years, I believe the number is basically, where's that long sheet?
So I think you said even though the top line sales is fluctuating, the profitability is still kind of holding in there.
We've moved basically around 2004, if you go 10 years back, from 37.7 up to where we are now, about 38.5,
So
39.
very, very steady then, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And has the government, expressed satisfaction with that level of profitability, or do they have questions about it, or?
Well, I'm very fortunate. I've had the opportunity to work with all 3 governments of political stripes, and there's always pressure on that line to improve net income contribution. But I think there has been a fair reflection by all parties that that's a very significant amount of money that we're delivering. And it always has to be done in balance as we try and improve it, without necessarily either damaging the consumer offer, the consumer potential of putting too much pressure on our vendor suppliers.
Okay. And I started to say I looked at Newfoundland and New Brunswick in preparation for today at their bottom line profitability. And in Newfoundland, their Liquor Corp's sales are their profit was about 51%. And in New Brunswick, it was about 42%. And we're 38% here, particularly Newfoundland seems like a much higher profit margin. Do you have any comments on why that might be?
Again, we're 3 very, very different models, and you have to understand in Newfoundland's case, they also have a manufacturing capability as well, which tends to be a higher contributing part of any business, especially when you're the sole retailer of most of the product. They also have a very highly concentrated corporate store network, so their corporate stores are primarily in the St. John's area and then again on the West Coast. They have a high degree of distribution with very good profitability through convenience stores and gas stations and so on across the province. A very much higher level of consumption in Newfoundland than we have here in Nova Scotia. almost 30% higher. So it's a significantly different model. In New Brunswick, which on the surface may look more like us, they in fact are much more of a discount style operation. So they have a much lower percentage of corporate stores in their overall portfolio of offerings. They have a lot of agency stores in relative terms. They're also an organization that frankly has not invested into their corporation, and I think they're feeling some of those trends now. It's very, very challenging to run a network like theirs, which is completely different in terms of service and assortment and effectiveness. So our net income number, or the percentage that you're referring to of net income to sales, it's not the only measure that we look at for success. But certainly, we're quite pleased at the level that we're at, and it's our intention to continue to deliver at that level.
Yeah, okay, so so Newfoundland actually manufactures some of the alcohol that they sell in their chain, and New Brunswick has a kind of a different distribution model. That's
Yes.
kind of really the reasons behind
That's correct.
it. Okay. I'll probably come back to I do have a bunch of questions about agency stores, so I'll probably come back to that. But one of the things that we've heard is that from the finance minister is that they've asked all government departments to reduce expenditures by 1%. I don't know if that's extended to you guys or not. Have you had any talk about whether to reduce expenditures by 1%?
Our approach is really about controlling the expenditures. I mean, we are also a bit different than most other government departments because we are revenue generating. So all the investments that we make, whether they be in operating expenses or capital, are designed to increase our revenue, and increase that dollar contribution in some fashion if we can. So while we're always trying to be cost effective and manage expenses effectively, there's only so many ways we can do that before we start hurting the performance of the business. So I guess to answer the question directly, we're not specifically trying to drive a 1% cost reduction through the business. The vast majority of our expenses are in the retail network, in our retail stores, and in our retail employees. And our model is based on their performance as opposed to cutting them.
Okay, that does answer the question. I appreciate that. So demographics obviously play a role in the future of any business, and we have a shrinking population and an aging population here in Nova Scotia. So how has that impacted your forecast going forward for revenue? Do you expect sales to kind of, I think you referred to sales already kind of decreasing, but the product mix changing so that the profit goes up. Is that kind of the trend you see going forward? Yes. Next 5 years?
Absolutely. I mean, the demography of the province, I mean, it's no secret to anyone. It's certainly challenging for a business like ours, not unlike any other business, I guess. But specifically within our world, what happens as the population ages, obviously consumption definitely falls. The mix of what we sell changes also. So we are forecasting that for the foreseeable future, we will see volume declines consistently for the next 3, 4, 5 years.
So you'd see volume declines, but you're still expecting the profits to kind of hang in there? Would that be a fair statement?
Well, that's certainly our objective. I mean, yeah. It's our ability. We think we've been able to do it since 2009, so we don't see any reason why we can't going forward, that if we can manage our mix appropriately, make the right investments, that we should be able to maintain our net income.
Okay, thank you. Has there been any talk about privatizing the Liquor Corp?
There's always talk of privatizing the Liquor Corp. Popular topic of the day, I think, every day.
Is not something you've specifically discussed with the minister or the deputy minister about? Have you been asked to prepare any reports or anything like that?
Not on privatization, no.
Okay, thank you. How much does the NSLC spend on travel per year?
Our travel, which is primarily around driving around stores, supervising the 160 outlets that we deal with, is just over 600,000.
Okay, so the travel is mostly inside the province?
Yes.
There may be a few trade shows or something, but?
Yes.
Okay. So according to the annual report, hi Maureen. According to the annual report, there was 51 agency stores in the province, and I think you referred to 60 in your opening comments. So there's 9 new agency stores over the last few months. What's the projection for agency stores going forward for the rest of the year? Do you intend that to increase it, continue to increase? Or?
Yeah, we don't have any direct plans at this point to add any more agency stores to the network. There will be if I can call it, there's always a bit of flux in the number because some will close, who are either unsuccessful or for whatever reason decide to get out of the business, and then we may replace them or we may not, based on their performance of how they're doing. It is not an easy game to be rolling out agency stores, so we like to make sure we're doing it in a structured and meaningful manner. So we don't like to do multiple rollouts of agency stores as a general rule. We look at our retail network as we go through our business planning process every single year, and we're in a 5-year planning process right now, so we're looking at it even longer. At that time, we'll identify, are there any communities that we think are underserved that still require an agency store, but there's nothing on our plan at the moment.
Oh, there's not, okay.
Yeah.
So there wouldn't be kind of any communities on your map that you think are underserved?
I wouldn't say there's any that we've identified that we think are underserved. We get lots of input from people that even though we're out in the province and we're driving around, every now and then we'll get one recommended or suggested to us, and we'll go and make an investigation to see if it makes sense. But there's nothing that we're aware of that would say we have a community that we think is underserved.
Okay, so that process, if somebody brought something to your attention, you could, if you agreed with them, you could put an agency store there, put a tender and put an agency store. They don't have to have a plan where you say we're targeted, whatever, 15 agency stores this year. It just kind of, as it happens, it happens.
Well, I wouldn't say it's quite as arbitrary as that. I mean, the program itself is a well-defined program, and you have to understand that it's a part of how we treat the entire network. So we consider them our agency stores, and they're intended to be complementary to the network of retail stores that we have and other agency stores that are out there. So the process itself has fairly well-defined criteria, and in order for us to go down the road of putting one in play, it has to be complementary, it has to be accretive to the overall performance of the supply chain of beverage alcohol. And if it isn't, then it's very, very difficult for us to justify, we are a commercial enterprise, to justify why we would do it. We are quite dutiful in making sure we understand what's happening in communities around the province. And it's one of the reasons why we feel there aren't communities that we think are underserved. But again, we're not perfect. We're not in every location all the time. So we're flexible enough that if someone brings us an opportunity, we're definitely going to consider it.
Okay. How does the NSLC profit from agency stores? Is it just by selling the alcohol to them?
Well, they operate on what's called a retail discount level. So their operating margin, or what we get out of agency stores, is basically an 8% discount off the retail price, between 5 and 8%, depending on the community. And the way we save is that is a more effective way of delivering that service to a particular community. And what that means is there's a little bit of a consumption lift by having that particular location. It's small, but in our world it's enough that it makes it financially feasible for them, and it's financially feasible for us to do it. In the beginning stages of the program, these were designed as with that 8% gap, it's about the same percentage or slightly better than the percentage of our store operating costs. So if it goes above that, it's much more effective for us to just open a corporate store in that environment. At that level, we're virtually saving 1% in terms of the operating expense of that particular sales of beverage alcohol going through that outlet. So again, for us, we love them. We think they're great, and they've served us very, very well.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. So, because I didn't want to jump to the conclusion that because New Brunswick has more agency stores, that's why they're slightly more profitable. But it does seem like where the mix is right, it would be more profitable. I think, did you say it's 1% more profitable to the corporation? It's
1% more profitable than a corporate store would be in that location.
Okay.
If we move to larger volume stores, our operating costs shrink dramatically from that number. So just that type of delivery is not necessarily what consumers are expecting when we normally go into a beverage alcohol retailing environment. They have a high standard of expectation for us in terms of what we deliver, and an agency store does not necessarily deliver that. What they deliver is convenience, and they deliver access in a geography that we potentially can't serve efficiently.
Okay, no, thank you, that's helpful. So the agency store model has been a success. It's a good business plan.
Yes, it is.
And I've been through some of the applications and stuff on how the criteria you have to meet to apply for an agency store. And I'm just wondering if there's any movement inside the corporation to give some weight to distinct communities as opposed to just the geographic distance that they look at now. I forget what it is, it's 10 kilometers maybe. It can't be within a certain distance of an existing corporate store. And I'm just wondering how rigid that is in terms of, because I did hear, I think I heard you say distinct communities as well. You weren't aware of any communities out there that were underserviced. Are you looking at changing the criteria around agency stores at all?
We aren't at this point, and maybe I'll elaborate to have a bit more clarity for you. The rules around how close they can be to an agency store are well designed within our own cannibalization models. So we know, based on our research and our history, that customers will change their traffic patterns at about 11 kilometers. And we know that at the 13-kilometer range, it's just enough that convenience, if they're that far away from us, will add a little bit of incremental purchasing or a little bit of incremental consumption. Nothing damaging, but just enough for the community that it makes sense. If we go any closer than that, it really cannibalizes the local corporate store. And what that means is those sales will actually become unprofitable for us as a commercial enterprise. And I mean, you could argue, well, then you should just be reducing your labor in those corporate stores. But in many of these locations, our corporate stores run so lean that there's not any more room for us to do that. So it's a combination. We have to be, again, we're managing the entire network. So if it's both the balance between those two, the corporate store and an agency store, that's really important for us. The notion of distinct community, though, I think for us is very dangerous, because it's what's the definition then of distinct that we'd have to apply to the model, which today is commercially based. If we add the notion of a particular community and a particular geography with some other kind of criteria that's not necessarily commercial in nature, I'm not sure how we would ever be able to defend this community is distinct and this one isn't. Mm-hmm. When I use the word distinct, I mean a specific community that's underserved. And I don't foresee us going down that road at this point.
Okay, and obviously I'm thinking of an area in my own constituency,
Yes.
Thorburn.
And I know the location well. It's actually a wonderful location. You may not know, but I lived in Pictou County myself for 7-8 years, and I know the place well. I know that they're a great little retailer, and they do a wonderful job. Unfortunately, their challenges are just too close to one of our locations in Stellarton. So it's one of those opportunities that if the corporate store environment changes, that maybe that store might become a better one down the road a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I certainly feel for the young operator that's in there that I think is going to do a wonderful job. Great family and a great operator. At this point, though, just too close.
Yeah, and the reason that I'm asking those, he's kind of right on the fringes, and I do believe he's on a traffic pattern for people that head out to their cottages out at the lake and stuff like that. But anyways, I wanted to ask that question. So it sounds like there's really no. It's just the rules are the rules, and there's really no move afoot to try and take a look at those, how they impact certain areas.
That's true.
Okay. So in terms of agency stores that you have opened, particularly maybe the 9 that have opened, how do you just this year? How do you determine what the impact on your stores is? Like, do you do a follow-up study for the next few years that says, well, we saw a change in sales at the corporate store, or we didn't, or do you? And again, I'm backing into why you're so rigid on your rules on the geographic. How do you?
Yeah, we do a modeling before we start to determine what we think the commercial impact is going to be, and then about 6 months after we've opened the location, and they've had a chance to get the business under their belt, we look at the impact on the corporate environment. So those particular stores, we'll be looking at them in the kind of January, February timeline after we get past Christmas. It's critical that these stores really need to be open for a summer before you can really tell what the impact's going to be. So these are, quite frankly, a little bit late to the game, if you will. We would have much preferred to have them open earlier. So we'll take a snapshot of it in January after Christmas. We'll probably wait till we get to next September before we'll make an absolute call on what their performance is. Having said that, we have not gone in and closed an agency store because the model ended up not being accurate in terms of our projection. But at least it allows us to know what the return of that particular location has been. The biggest concern we have, frankly, with these locations and why we do this is that we know when they get down to a certain level of volume, they become highly at risk themselves. It costs a significant amount of money to operate one of these. We demand a certain standard of execution in the store, which many of them are not set up for before they get into the game in terms of separation of goods and receiving docks and safety and all those sort of things. And if they add refrigeration, which is a big part of what consumers expect, and then they have to carry inventory of anywhere from $35,000 to $50,000 a year. So we get very nervous when we get into some of these smaller ones, and that's where we are right now. Most of these stores that we're bringing on are quite small in terms of volume.
But in terms of the distance, the closest distance you can be to an existing store, is that something has increased over time? Like at one point in time, did you used to have agency stores that were closer and you've said, well, that's too close, that's impacting our business, let's move it out? Or did it go the other way? Or has it always been that same kilometer distance?
The only change we've made is that we realized that the hard rule of the community itself actually got in the way of where the store actually was. So in some communities, the distance between, it was 15 kilometers, and the community might have been 15 kilometers away, but the store that was going to service that community was less than 15, but not as far as 11. So we decided to put some flexibility in that at 13 kilometers, it would still not cannibalize our store too much, or the corporate store closest too much, but at the same time allow it to service a community that it might not be right in the center of. So that's the only change that we've made in my time.
So you changed it so that you're measuring to the actual store point as opposed to the community point?
Yes.
Right. Because so there are some stores that were just in the community, and that was so, okay. No, that's helpful. I need to think about that.
Order. Time's expired for the PC caucus. We'll move to the NDP caucus and Ms. McDonald.
Thank you, and I apologize for my lateness. Have to get the winter tires on before the storm comes, so there you go. It's nice to see you again. I have a number of questions as well around privatization and agency stores and so forth. I guess the first thing I would start with is that back in 2013, during the election, the Premier made a commitment that a Liberal government wouldn't privatize or sell off the liquor corporation that was part of the Liberal platform. So my question is, was that message ever conveyed or discussed with the board or yourself?
Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you. To the best of my knowledge, that conversation or that position of the Premier has not been discussed with the board. I can tell you in my case, it's been made very clear that the Premier has no intention of privatizing the NSLC.
Okay, thank you. So that you say in your case, does that mean you've had conversations with him?
Through our minister.
Through your minister, that's explicit in that
Yes.
direction? Yes. So around the agency stores, we've had a number of new agency stores added, bringing the total to what exactly? How many do we have now?
60.
60. And I think I heard you indicate as I came in, there's no plan to add any additional. That's kind of it for the moment. Did I hear that?
That's correct.
Okay. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit on the whole model of the agency store and how it fits into the business plan for NSLC.
Okay, certainly, thank you. Great question. Agency stores are really designed to provide a similar access to product that the NSLC particularly offers to sell in a service area or a community in which the NSLC cannot afford to service. So they're designed to let consumers shop close to home without necessarily having to drive long distances to reach us. So their primary purpose is to increase access in a safe way in communities that the NSLC cannot afford to be in. Their original design was a competitive process, so the amount of discount that they get in order to be successful operating has some variation in it. It was a wide open RFP type call, and operators could come in and bid whatever they wanted to potentially win their location or their community. What has become clear over the years is that we needed to limit that amount of competitive activity on the discount, or the portion that we're going to get out of it, because they were definitely putting some of these operators in jeopardy. So the program has become a little bit more, I'll call it restrictive in that sense, in that we will not allow an operator to bid below 5% in a competitive situation. And we put the ceiling at 8 for the reasons we've already said. Anything more than that, we'd be better to operate one of our own stores. So the combination of that, and now a well-defined program in terms of operating standards, in terms of what they need to do to be successful, has set the program up, I think, to do what it's doing quite well, which is complement the NSLC's ability to satisfy the largest portion of the population. Today's environment, the NSLC, through its corporate store network, sells 91% of the beverage alcohol for Nova Scotians. That's the highest level of corporate store performance in the country. So there are much more corporate stores per capita in terms of delivering sales than there are anywhere else in the country. And the agency stores have been a great complement to that. So we've tried very hard not to set them up completely as entrepreneurs, but we want them still to be independent, do their own thing. They have the unique opportunity to bundle other services with their stores, which we think is very helpful in these rural communities. I look at some of them, such as like Albert Bridge in Cape Breton, which is a wonderful location. It's a combination of gas bar, convenience store, Sears outlet, Canada Post outlet. I mean, it's got video store. It's got a whole number of things attached to it, as well as the opportunity to buy beverage alcohol in that location. So they provide a great service for that community up there, which we would never be able to build a corporate store to do even what we do, let alone build all those other services in for those rural communities. It's a model that derives its assortment completely from ours. So unlike at the private wine stores, which are expected to be unique and interesting and somewhat exclusive, the agency stores must buy their assortment from the NSLC's assortment. Again, it's supposed to be a delivery of the NSLC's model or NSLC's package in rural Nova Scotia as far as they can take it. They still have the option that they can carry anything they want from that assortment, and we have now 7,000 items in our assortment. So these small stores that are carrying 60 to 80 products have a wide breadth of things to choose from. But we just do not let them go outside that. There really is no need for them to do so. And to be quite frank, these operators are entrepreneurs, and they've figured out what's right for their own communities. And again, I think they're doing a wonderful job in delivering that.
What percentage of their sales in the overall sales of NSLC? What is the percentage of the agency store sales?
They're just over 6%.
6%.
Yeah, they do about 37 million a year as a group.
37 million. Has NSLC been cutting hours in rural communities in the last year?
Not specifically just in rural communities, but we've been adjusting our workforce. Well, we do it every year, but we've been adjusting our workforce to reflect the transactional changes that are happening in the environments. We're always trying to get more efficient and more effective. I think this year we're running slightly down in terms of overall my hours here. Yeah, slightly down, about 2% down in hours in the overall network. The rural agency store, or sorry, the rural Nova Scotia stores are very efficient now. They run with very lean staffs. So most of that change is actually happening in our corporate stores, in the large corporate stores in the centers. These stores are running basically skeleton staffs. We have cut operating hours in some of these locations. So instead of being open on Sundays, we had to close some of them on Sundays. It just wasn't the transactions to support it. We also have looked at Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays during the week with virtually no customers in the stores. There's no reason to keep them open, so we have closed a number of those as well. But in terms of the absolute number of hours specifically at our rural stores, there's no direct intention to just cut them.
Are you doing a review of Class 1 stores? Is there a review underway?
And review in what regard?
Well, any form of a review in terms of the hours, the numbers of staff, those kinds of things.
Again, not specifically for Class 1. We do this all the time for all our stores. We are running about 50 less people in the retail network today than we did last year. But that's just the normal pulse of flow of when we have casuals hired and RPTs and how that moves through the network. But labor review is something this organization does ongoing all the time. So the short answer is not just for Class 1, but for all stores, we review our labor costs.
Yeah. I think you're aware that there's always been a concern that agency stores may allow more minors to have access in the rural communities. What is the monitoring with respect to this, and is that true that there is a greater potential for minors to have access in some of the agency stores versus your larger corporate?
I mean, potential is it's a hypothetical, so I'm not really quite sure how to answer that. But I will tell you that the agency stores are required to do all the training and execute exactly the same way as the NSLC stores are supposed to do. So we have our WeID program requires that anyone who looks under the age of 30 is expected to be asked for ID by the retail staff, and we expect that to happen within the agency stores as well. They receive our full training packages. They have to complete it. They have to keep records of that training. They have to be able to verify it. We also mystery shop those stores exactly the same way as we mystery shop the NSLC stores, and we report those results back to them. We have a team of people that work with the agency stores, not just on their social responsibility side, but also on their operating side. One of their key measures is, in fact, how those stores are actually doing. I have to say myself, having been in many of these stores, I think there's probably a lower risk of underserved, or overserved minors in those locations, simply because everybody knows everybody in those towns. So I think it's very unlikely, assuming you don't have an agency store operator that is just not executing well. I think their potential is probably less than it is in one of our corporate stores here in the city, where you just don't know everybody. But they are doing much, much better in terms of their checking of IDs. And as I said, we have mystery shops in them just like we have in our own stores. And their scores are getting better and better all the time. And I always hesitate to share that a bit, because everyone says, wow, they're not 100%. That's terrible. Well, it doesn't mean they're serving people. It just means they have a bit more work to do in terms of their focus and energy on it. But I think the risk is as I suggested. I think it's probably not as great as it would be in a corporate store where everybody doesn't know everyone. And we're going to ensure that, and it's a big part of our mandate, is to make sure that all retailers are executing the WeID programs.
What is the data showing in terms of the rate of minors when you do your mystery tours?
Mystery shops? The agency stores are performing agency stores are about a 75% score, which I'll say is okay historically. It's not great. Our corporate stores would be over 90 as a group. So they have some work to do. But again, we use that it's really a learning and educational tool. You have to appreciate it's one person showing up in a store at one time, over a 3 or 4 month period, and then reporting back. So it's definitely lower than our corporate stores are performing at, but I don't think necessarily the risk is any higher.
Does the corporation have a policy with respect to the proximity of agency stores to schools?
No, we do not.
Are you aware of the proximity of some of the agency stores to schools?
We track our corporate stores to proximity to schools, but not necessarily agency stores. And I'll say it's a bit challenging. I mean, you folks know Nova Scotia certainly as well as I do, but 75% of our corporate stores are within a kilometre of a school. So my estimation would be in many of these rural communities, if they have a school, chances are these agency stores are going to be close to them. Their communities are communities, and they tend to have all their services somewhat centralized.
How about right across from a school? Like
That-
not a kilometer, but across the street from a school? Do you have any knowledge of
I do
of
not.
that? I know of at least one that's right across from a school in the monastery area. So would that be something that the corporation would look at? I mean, it seems to me if you have data that tells you the percentages or the incidence of selling to minors in a general sense, then the work that would flow from that data, improving the IDing programs and training and what have you, may only be a part of the puzzle. You'd be able to identify if a particular agency store had consistently higher rates, would you not? Do you mine the data for that kind of information?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's statistically, deep enough that we could do that on an analytical basis that would tell us much more than, whether on that particular point in time that agency store performed on the mystery shop. I think what it does indicate to me, because again we have probably as many or more corporate stores as close to schools, we need to be absolutely diligent on our training and monitoring of all our retail opportunities or retail channels, to make sure that young people are not getting access to alcohol. And I think that's really our responsibility to do that. I think the proximity issue, while there's something we have to be perhaps more aware of, I'm not sure it's necessarily going to indicate whether or not people are actually getting access to the product. That's more a duty and a discipline within the retail execution as opposed to a geographic location issue.
Okay. I'd like to move off this topic now and just talk about the business side of things more generally. I know that a couple of summers ago, beer sales were kind of on the skids. It was a bad summer. Last summer, the weather was much nicer. I'm presuming that sales were better and are heading in a better direction. Can you give us some sense of the trajectory of the revenues around the various components of the corporation, beer sales, wine, spirits? What's that trajectory been looking like, let's say, in the last year or 2 years?
Great question. Yes, absolutely, I can do that. We are still feeling the same challenges that we've been experiencing, I'd say, really since 2009. Weather definitely is a factor within the beer environment. And we talk about, we really have two seasons at the NSLC. We have the summer season, which is primarily driven by beer and some of the refreshment categories. And then we have the other half, which is really driven by wine and spirits. The reality of it is, within that environment, beer is still performing poorly. I think the only change that's happened in the last, call it 3 or 4 years, is that the acceleration of the ready-to-drink category, primarily driven by ciders, is growing at a rate that's now almost offsetting the declines in beer. It's a phenomena specifically in beer that's not unique to Nova Scotia. It's happening everywhere, not just in Canada, but in the United States and basically everywhere internationally in the developed world. Mainstream beer is in significant decline and has not stopped declining. I can say that the weather elements that you're referring to, it's become very concerning that the actual date, time, and hour almost matter now with beer. It's really a weekend issue. It's really almost a Friday afternoon to the Friday drive home issue for people. It seems to set the confidence and tone for the weekend plans. And a rainy Friday afternoon will virtually destroy a week that's been sunny and bright for the rest of the time. The point we're at now in the season or in the year, those weather factors really don't matter anymore. So at this stage of the game, the best thing that can happen is a storm that gets threatened that never shows. But in the grand scheme of things, it'll all weigh out in the wash in terms of the purchasing within the category. Spirits is a much different animal. Spirits is in a serious decline mode. We're talking high single digits in many cases, 3, 4, 5%. That's a very large decline in our world. We've had a little bit better performance this year. We're declining at about 2%, 2.2%. But spirits is a category that has virtually no innovation in it whatsoever. And with our demography, we know that as people age, primarily men, they switch away from spirits. They either go to really premium spirits or they move into wine. And that's definitely happening in our marketplace. And the combination of no innovation and demography and all these things, the spirit performance will continue to be negative, and we forecast it will be for the foreseeable long future. In the beer balance, we also have craft beer to consider, and craft beer is doing wonderfully well. In Nova Scotia, it's a little bit behind the rest of Canada and the rest of the U.S., and that craft beer really is a local craft beer opportunity. And while it's doing very well, it's not yet big enough here to reach what it's reaching in other places. In the U.S. now, craft beer is like 14% of the entire beer category. We're nowhere near that now, but great opportunity for these craft and microbreweries that are popping up all over Nova Scotia, and we think that's going to be a real opportunity. It won't necessarily be an opportunity for the NSLC. They'll be selling most of their product direct and through their other channels, and when we do sell it, we don't make very much margin on it, but still a good thing for the economy and a good thing for the category. I mentioned refreshment is definitely about ciders right now. Ciders are doing incredibly well. It's a combination of it's new, it's innovative, it's modern. It also appeals to female consumers. It's gluten-free. So all those elements are making it a really interesting category with lots of excitement and lots of local execution as well. The big, if I can call it big, growth engine is really wine. And wine's growth is driven by a number of factors. It's growing at about 1% overall in terms of volume, with a declining overall consumption trend. That's not a huge number, but it's certainly a great number for us, and we're very pleased that it's doing that. For us, it's being driven across the board. Consumers are just drinking more wine. The same issue. Those people that are switching away from beer are drinking wine. They're drinking better wine. So the combination of drinking better and drinking more wine is really moving that category along nicely. Clearly, Nova Scotia wines are a real popular element within this province. I mentioned earlier how well they're doing. They're growing at a great rate.
Sorry to cut you off there. I went over a minute there. It was interesting comments. We'll move to the Liberal Caucus for 20 minutes. Mr. Stronach.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, and I'll just get right into a couple questions. Actually, it's a bunch of lead-on questions. My first question, I guess, really is to understand the distilleries, the local distilleries here in Nova Scotia. Presently, my understanding is that wineries get a higher margin. Nova Scotia wineries get a higher margin to work with than distilleries, so they're able to sell directly to you much easier than, say, Ironworks would. Is that being looked at so that Ironworks would have a potential to sell into your stores?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we are in the process of launching a new distillery program. It's going to have a number of components to it. We will be equalizing what we call the retail store margin allowance, which is what happens at the actual location that they're brewing and retailing, distilling and retailing specifically. We will be equalizing that with the Nova Scotia Wine RSMA amount, which will be a big help specifically for Ironworks, which does a huge amount of their business right out of their Lunenburg facility. Yeah. We are looking at a blended and distilled and then Nova Scotia product combination markup structure, which we'll be announcing. I think we've announced it to them already. We have, so the players all have it, and that'll be launching in the new year. So we're looking at a markup reduction, if I can call it that, for a series of steps. So if you distill the product in Nova Scotia, you'll get a certain markup. If you just blend the product in Nova Scotia, you'll get an improved markup. If you distill and then blend with Nova Scotia agricultural products, you'll get another break as well. So we're very excited that this is going to help these distilleries that are all coming on board. Today, we really only have one that's commercially viable, and that's Glenora.
Right.
This will help certainly Ironworks get there, and as I mentioned, we have 5 others that are coming on very quickly.
Yeah. Thank you. I guess I kind of want to go into the private wine stores a bit to have a discussion there. My understanding right now with the private wine stores is that they can only own one private wine store. Like each individual can only own one wine store. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So how does it work now? You have Bishop's, and then you have the other 3, right? And the other 3 are owned by Mickey McDonald, Colin McDonald, and Rodney Levy. They're all pretty much connected. So I'm just trying to, so that I can understand how were they able to do that when it's supposed to be all individual?
Great question. Private wine stores come with a lot of history to them, and they were an original, I call it a pilot or a test program, done back in the days when privatization was on the table, and there was a desire, if you will, to have a private enterprise model tested that just in case the NSLC, when it incorporated, was not able to fix itself and turn itself into what it is today, there'd be this model that we could potentially, or that the government could potentially roll out in some fashion. The challenge with that is it never estimates all the unanticipated consequences that can come from a program such as that, and I'll be fair to say that I don't think the NSLC at the time was all that receptive to having a program like that. Having said that, I think over the years we've all grown and evolved to a point where we recognize that it's a viable channel providing a great level of service primarily to licensees, a level of service that certainly NSLC would never do. We're not going to run a case of wine up to someone on a Friday night at 10:30 to a bar. It's just not in our ability to do that. But what happened in the process of designing and evolving the organization, the actual operating agreements and the definition and standards of what ownership constituted was quite frankly not very clear. So there was no distinction between another family member owning a particular outlet. There was no distinction about related companies. There was no distinctions that would necessarily prohibit a business that could look at different ways of structuring themselves to either have the ability to own or influence, multiple outlets. Having said that, we've historically tried to get the 4 of them to work together because they're so small as a group that their ability to acquire product, get these exclusive listings that they really require is really, really limited. We still do all their procurement for them, all their sourcing. We bring everything in for them, in along with when we're bringing our own products in. But it makes it very difficult for them to be able to do it effectively. And buying 10 cases from some weird winery in Argentina is very hard to get here in a cost-effective way. So that kind of allowed the other 3 wineries, or 3 of the wineries that you mentioned, or 3 private wine stores that you mentioned, to organize themselves as a group. And the acquisition that Mickey McDonald made, the first one, was done at a time when that previous owner was probably going to go bankrupt, and no one wanted to see that, and he was able to make that happen. He was so pleased with that business, then his son got involved with the second one. And then Rod, who's running the one from Jim Foster, the Premier, saw the opportunity to work closely with those 2 guys to actually do things effectively. They have their own warehousing space now. So that's kind of the history of why it is where it is. It isn't a pretty history, to be honest, but it is what it is.
So are you going to allow these expansion of private wine stores outside of HRM?
There's no plan for it at the moment. Again, these are very expensive operations for us. If you figure at a 30% discount, which is what they operate at, and they, the group of them do $12 million a year, so you're talking a $4 million cost ultimately to the Treasury. There's no incrementalism that's happening on the performance of the sales. It's basically 70% of the business or more is licensee business, which is coming directly out of the NSLC. Not necessarily anything wrong with that, but to do them is very, very expensive. So if you think about, they probably carry 1,000, maybe 1,200 unique SKUs in the marketplace. To spend $4 million a year to get 1,200 SKUs in the province is a very expensive thing to do. Now, if there was a market for one, if we could see a market that looked like it would be viable, I'm sure we would consider it, if the government of the day decided that was something that they would like to do. But we have no reason to believe that there's any market anywhere that could support one of these stores.
So, and I guess from there, and I look at, product sharing from you guys. So my understanding that the rules that are in place right now is that if a Bishop seller has a wine, that they'd like to bring in, but you guys already sell it, they're not able to do that. Is that correct?
That's
so
correct.
So those brands cannot expand or grow or get a bigger footprint in HRM specifically. Is that and why do you do that?
Well, again, the original purpose for these operators was to have a completely unique and exclusive offering that the NSLC wouldn't have. So it was about expanding the assortment and service to Nova Scotians, not just about taking the product that the NSLC was selling and maybe offer it cheaper or in some different fashion. So the whole purpose of that store is to be unique and different and interesting. If all they do is sell the same products as the NSLC, there's no real reason for them to do it. Now, having said that, what we've done over the years, because wine comes in both ways, so there's very often times when a product will be started at one of the private wine stores, and then the supplier would much rather be in 105 NSLC corporate stores. So we've developed over time kind of this mutual sharing approach that once a product's been built by a particular private wine store, they get an exclusivity. So 2 years, maybe more, will allow them to keep that product on their own, and the vendor cannot move that product to allow them to reap the rewards of their hard work that they've done. And depending on the product, we'll also make allowances that if it's in a licensee channel already, we'll let them keep it in the licensee channel and just move it into our retail channel. And vice versa, we carry, as I mentioned, 7,000 products now. The vast majority are wine. We're delisting products all the time. We're moving in and out products all the time. If we have a product that has mediocre success for us and we're going to get rid of it, they're more than willing and sometimes wanting to take it, because a mediocre wine for us would be a barn burner for them. So there is a bit more back and forth on the listings than the actual model would indicate, but we do want them to be as exclusive as they can.
Okay, great. And I think that's, and I get one other question that I have, a quick one, just on how these guys work. So in my business, in retail, we usually get 90 to 120-day terms within my business and my world. And my understanding is that these wine stores have to pretty much pay for their product up front before it can leave your facility. Is that correct? And why? Why won't you guys give them terms so that they can better manage their money?
Yeah, we have given them terms.
Okay.
They're now getting 30 days.
Is that new?
That's fairly new, yeah.
Okay.
That would have been as of July.
Okay.
Yeah. We historically, the original program was cash on barrelhead. So once a product showed up in our facility, before you could take it out, you had to pay for it cash up front. The original design was not only that, but when the product showed up at the port, before it came through customs, we'd expect to know when you're going to pull it, and we'd want the money then. It became pretty clear that would have bankrupted all of them. So we went to a program where we'll take it, we'll sit on it, we'll warehouse it for you, and when you take it out, you pay by credit card or cash or whatever. That went on for a number of years until we got to the point where these 4 little stores were approaching 6% of our inventory in our warehouse, and it just, entire rows and rungs of inventory that we just could not afford. We were about to have to expand our warehouse to the tune of, $10, $15 million just to house private wine store inventory. So we came to an agreement that what we required them to do was to take the inventory as it came in. Our original thought was, we'll just take it as it comes, but then we decided, as long as they were moving it out in 30 days, it would help their cash flow a little bit, and we figured we could manage that amount of inventory ourselves as it moved through. Yeah, so they're getting 30 days now.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll move on to Ms. Miller. We got about 10 minutes left for the Liberal Caucus.
Okay, thank you. Very nice to see you here today. In my past life, we certainly had a good, with Mad Canada, we certainly had a good association with the NSLC and your social responsibility. Now, I know that you've been very active in the multimedia shows that go out to all schools to encourage students not to drink and drive. How's that going right now? I know that you've been building on that over the years. How many schools do you think you'll have that multimedia show in this year?
I believe we're over 60 now. I don't have the exact number in my head, but we're well over 60 stores that we're funding. The total number, I'm not sure. Do you have that, Lee?
We're reaching 70 junior and senior high schools and over 50,000 students.
50,000 students in the province, excellent.
Yeah, through the partnership with MAD.
Okay, so and is that a role that's going to keep expanding? Do you see that moving forward to, encompassing basically all schools in the province on a yearly or semi-yearly basis?
Yes.
Excellent, that's wonderful, and it does really great, it certainly does a lot of good, because the chapters, local chapters, just don't have that ability to fund these expensive shows. So I think that's a great addition, a good addition to your program. The other thing I want to talk about is the agency stores, and I do have some concerns with the agency stores. Not prohibitionist, didn't work, can't work. I really believe in not privatization. I've argued that many times in the past, you know, with different media outlets who argue for it, simply because of the statistical information that we know. Areas that don't have, that do have privatization of their liquor sources, they have more deaths and injuries. So with the monitoring that you're doing, it's doing a good job to keep our youth safe. But the agency stores, I have a little bit of pause with. I don't mind the agency stores. I think some of them are doing a really good job. I look at Masstown Market and how they have it as a separate little retail outlet. It's got the walls, things are not joined. Yet I'll go somewhere else that's a smaller unit, and I'm almost seeing the spirits next to the ketchup, you know, on the same shelf. And I have a little bit of concern about that. What kind of regulations are in place for the display purposes? Could we be doing a better job in keeping the agency store part of those corner stores or whatever as more of a separate unit, so that, you know, we don't have the beer next to the Red Bull, you know, or the single serving alcohol servings next to, you know, the Diet Coke? Is there a way that we can make that a little more of a distinct section of the store?
Well, it's a great question, and there are, I guess the answer to the first question is there are no regulations that require that to happen, other than within the operating agreements that we have with the agency stores. So there is supposed to be separation. I will say that when we first were rolling the program, first rolling the expansion of the program, I'll say, we actually required separate cash registers and separate rooms off to the side. And what we found is it became incredibly onerous for those individuals, both on a labor standpoint and a capital investment standpoint. It just didn't make sense for these small operators in these small towns. We still have the requirement that the product needs to be distinct, and I'll absolutely agree with you. I think we can do a better job, and they can do a better job of organizing their stores so that we don't run into some of those situations. Where I see one of their bigger challenges right now is on the refrigeration side. They have such little refrigeration, and their customers are demanding refrigeration that we do, not often, but we sometimes see products will get too close together. So you'll see, you know, cans of beer next to Red Bull or something else that's in a refrigerated environment. Our operators are very sensitive to it, so the folks that work with these agency stores to make sure that they are being effective and holding up their end of this bargain are doing a better job of it as well. So I think we can do a better job. I'm not sure regulation or you know, anything else formal is going to make it any better than what it is. I also think we have to remember that even beyond the capital side and the you know, and the, you know, the cost of actually doing the separation to an extreme, many of these stores are really, really small. So to actually, you know, force them to have say a 2-foot gap between the beer and the Red Bull, it's going to be so small. I'm not sure it's going to be meaningful to what I know most people are concerned about, which is the you know, the notion of the association being one of a very normalized way. But I think we can do a better job of helping them make sure those separations, where at all possible, are meaningful and distinct. And I don't think we're necessarily doing that well yet today.
Okay, it's something to work on for
Yes,
the
it
future.
is.
Yeah, thank you. Also, what about the agency store staffing? I think that's always been a concern too. Do they require the same staffing? Do they have to be of legal age actually to be able to work in a corner store that has an agency store involved?
They have to be of legal age to sell the product.
So the same as it would be in a normal NSLC store. Okay, and you talked about the mystery shoppers. That really makes me feel good to know that people are being monitored when they're not expecting it. Do you have also inspectors that go in on a regular basis, or do the mystery shoppers pretty much take care of that type of thing?
No, we have a team of individuals that both service, monitor, and support the agency store network.
All right, thank you very much. I'll turn it to my colleague.
Thank you. How much time?
We'll go to Ms. Loons-Croft for 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. I'm going to ask you questions about the Air Miles program. I'm sort of curious, being a monopoly, why have you brought in the Air Miles? I think of it as a way of competing with another business. So why the Air Miles program?
Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you. I think this is on my frequently asked question list. Most people on the surface think of us, as you say, we're a monopoly, so why? Why have this? And on our agency storefront, sometimes they ask, why are we competing with them with Air Miles? And the answer is, we're not. The issue of Air Miles for us is that it's currency for customer insight. So it's very, very important for us in declining sales mode, where declining volumes are happening, where we're seeing no economic growth in the province, that we need to understand how consumers are purchasing in as sophisticated a way as we can, so that we can influence that mix and the premiumization that's been the backbone of our business for a long time, for us to enhance our profitability. So when I say it's virtually currency for insights, we virtually pay customers through Air Miles to let us see not their particular name, but we get to see their purchases. With our SAP environment, we've always had great visibility into our systems and into our environment, into our business. We could see what customers were purchasing in combinations within a particular basket. So you come in, you buy your products, we could see it physically, what people were buying in conjunction with another, and we could use that information to help us make assortment decisions, promotion decisions, space decisions in the store, where we promote things, how we promote things. But what we couldn't see over time was how those baskets all connected. Now with Air Miles, we can see that. So we know what's happening with customer A in Yarmouth, who's purchasing this, and this throughout the entire beverage alcohol purchasing pattern for a year. And we can combine those with other like purchases. And those are how we're today managing our business from a premiumization point of view and from a mix point of view. So for us, it's very important that if we can get you to buy a $17 bottle of wine instead of a $15 bottle of wine, we're not getting you to drink more, but we're getting you to make us more money. And that's very important, and quite frankly, it's been the only way that we've been able to enhance our profitability and our margins going forward. I think it also provides for us a cost-effective way at doing data analytics that we wouldn't be able to do ourselves. So we try and be as efficient and as effective as we can. So in our head office environment, hiring a bunch of people to do data analytics can be very expensive. So we have a team of people at the Air Miles organization that can do that for us under contract that becomes bundled into the Air Miles costs, if you will. Now, to date, we've been very fortunate in that we've been able to take the Air Miles program and turn it into a bit of a profit center for us. So the bonus miles that you see on the shelf, we sell those bonus miles to suppliers. And it allows suppliers to compete against each other in a way that's not necessarily increasing consumption, but is doing the same thing. The mix, the premiumization, it's the choice of a competitive wine versus another wine at the same price. And by them buying those points from us, it's actually offsetting the costs of the program. So at least up until this year, the program itself has been a bit of a revenue generator, not a big one, but it's been covering the costs.
Order. Thank you. So we'll move back over to the PC Caucus for 14 minutes. Mr. Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to, before I switch to another topic, I just want to kind of wrap up in my mind on the agency stores and the private wine stores. So it sounds like there's no real kind of structured plan to expand that network, but always open to it. Is that kind of where it rests with those?
Yes, I mean, we're always interested in different models and approaches to help, again, manage the entire process of beverage alcohol in the province. So we try not to be closed-minded to any model.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So now, in terms of the marketing, I think that the Liquor Commission spends about $2 million a year on marketing. Is that done internally or externally, or how does that? Who manages the marketing?
Well, we have a department that manages marketing. It's actually a team that we call Marketing, Merchandising, and Customer Insight. So they look after all those pieces.
Okay.
As you say, we do about call it $2 million in marketing. The vast majority of that is done within the building. So within the buildings. So when you see.
No, that was just a curiosity I had. So since I just learned that for everyone who uses their Air Miles card, their pattern's pretty good, which makes me a little nervous. But do you use that data to come up with a set of promotions to use? Like, would you have promotions and flyers that you would send to a certain geographic area based on some of the data you know about buying patterns.
Yes.
And so do you have a set of promotions like that you have in mind for the year, or how do you kind of, how do you determine when the publications will come out and where they'll go?
Yeah, well, we run, very standard retailer, what we call marketing calendars for the year. We plan, 9 to 10 months in advance. The customer insights kind of promotion that you're referring to is one part of that. So it's a whole calendar and schedule of activities that we're going to do. We don't do a lot of external advertising. I mean, people see the color flyers that we put out occasionally. They tend to be driven by seasonal relevance and things that are happening specifically around that time. They're virtually almost always all premiumized products, new products, things that are going to add value to the basket. But again, the number is very small. I think it's like $400,000 a year that we spend on external media, and that number is actually a revenue source because it's all sold as well.
Right. Oh, good. Okay. So in terms of social media, I'm sure like everyone else, you guys are probably using more and more social media as time goes on. Do you have a number for how much of the $2 million budget is spent on social media?
It would be very small. I'll turn to my colleague here. If David, do we have that with us?
I don't think we have the split.
Mr. DiPercio?
Thank you. I'd have to say it's a very, very small percentage of our program. We have a little bit of IT spend to maintain a digital website, but it's probably around $100,000 on the IT side to support a digital platform, but very little of the marketing spend is related to it.
Okay. So overall, the use of the advertising budget is pretty effective in your business, or?
Well, that's literally it's the the $1 million question for us, the effectiveness of advertising. I think that the short answer I'll say is yes, based on the programs that we're doing now. To be quite frank, we've just started to really investigate which ones are working and which ones aren't. Every retailer has to go through that process,
How do you measure that?
Well, it depends on what the promotion actually is. It tends to be lift, could be lift. Could be follow-on purchase. So the promotion's intended to introduce you to Argentinian wine, and did you buy Argentinian wine down the road?
Okay.
So there's multiple success metrics that we could have.
Okay. In terms of negotiations with producers, so obviously you have monopoly pricing power. How do you negotiate with producers on pricing? Is there kind of a way you kind of speak to that a little bit? Because my curiosity is obviously is if somebody's trying to get a product listed and they can't get it listed and it's based on a price, price is too high or something, there's no place else for them to sell that product. So I'm just wondering how do you use the monopoly power that you have in terms of negotiating with producers?
That is probably the most complex question you could have asked today. So what I'll try and do is give you a sense of how it works.
Let me ask it another way then. How about this? Because it is a complex question. In the interest of my 9 minutes I have left, I don't want to use it all on that. But has industry expressed any concern over the way you negotiate with them?
Industry always expresses concerns about how monopolies negotiate, always. We virtually operate on an ad valorem model, which for the vast majority of our business means the vendor knows if they want to hit a certain retail price, what the cost is they need to quote. That is sometimes a disservice to Nova Scotians because it doesn't necessarily allow us to negotiate the price of the good to acquire it. So if they want to advertise or if they want to list a price at $19.99 and we think it's only worth $17.99, quite frankly, the cost we're going to get is going to take us to $19.99 for the vast majority of our business. For promotions, we're much more aggressive on promotions in terms of negotiating the price that's going to be required to hit a promotional flyer, promotional price, a promotional in-store. And we have certain parts of our business that we actually bid. That tends to be in the economy areas of our category assortments that we know have virtually no brand value. So, I mean, what we try and do is make sure that we are fair and as transparent as we can possibly be. But when we know we're only going to list 2 and there's going to be 15 who want to be listed, there's got to be some criteria to get 2. And that's where we would put significant pressure on the supplier community to have the lowest price.
Okay. I'm thinking of the wine industry here. I know that the wine sales are going up, and you also mentioned craft beer sales are going up. So do I understand correctly that the NSLC cut its markup that it had on local wine a few years ago, And that did that help to increase the sales of the wine, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yes, the first answer is yes, we did cut our markup. And it's absolutely allowed them to sell within our environments. I mean, the Nova Scotia wineries are very small, and with the exception of a couple, their ability to compete nationally even is very, very restricted at this point in time. As open and transparent and as helpful as we are to them, the rest of the world is not so much. So we have been providing them with tremendous support, proud to do so and glad to do so, that would allow them to sell products within our environment that they can make money on. So their markup structures are significantly reduced. We virtually make 25–30% gross margin on a bottle of Nova Scotia wine. An international wine, we'd be making 60% margin.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's a significant reduction. It allows them to, again, market within our stores. We virtually give them carte blanche. They can come in, we'll take everything that they have, assuming it's drinkable, but assuming it's drinkable, we'll take everything that they have, every listing that they offer us, we will take.
So that's really grown the industry then?
Yes.
Yeah. And the demand is there for
Yes,
these
absolutely.
products, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the number one wine in the entire NSLC assortment is a Nova Scotia wine.
Excellent. So in terms of the local beer, how does a local beer company get their product listed on your shelves? What's the process?
I'll perhaps split that question in half if I can. There's two types of beer approaches. The first one, which most people talk about, is our craft beer environment, and they enjoy a similar situation as the wine people do. They have a markup structure that is very advantageous for them. It's it's over half what it would be for a commercial brewery. So the gross margin that the NSLC would be expecting on a craft beer would be about 20%, which is, again, significantly less even than the wine folks have. And we take the same approach. I mean, they can retail it for whatever they want, and we will take virtually every listing that they have.
Do those producers have to be able to produce enough so you can stock it on all your stores?
Not all the stores, but there's a basic minimum amount that we need to have that even a single store could potentially support them. So we can't be in a position where we bring a product in, 5 cases and then never see it again. There has to be some measure of ongoing success. The public's expecting that. But overall, once these folks get going, they are able to supply enough of our stores so we can give them a presence and move their product through. The commercial side's much different. It's a much more competitive environment. Commercial breweries are really your Labatt's, your Mooseheads, your Molsons, and we consider them local. Since obviously we have a big plant here in Halifax, and their world is a bit more competitive. And so at the same time as we try and be as flexible and as supportive as we can, we expect them to compete with one another for their position in the store.
So how does it work? So as long as you can. Would a craft beer have to be inside a certain price range? So I'm thinking of like a smaller company like the North Brewing Company in Halifax. If they can't compete necessarily on price, it's the same way as the larger companies. So if they have to price their product at a certain, like how do you determine that? I know you're talking in terms of the margin that you require, but you're also looking at the price that the consumers will pay. So how do you negotiate with somebody like that in terms of shelf space?
Well, frankly, we don't negotiate with those folks. I mean, we will virtually take almost everything that they have and find a home for it in a way that's going to help them be successful. In terms of the retail price they want to sell it for, frankly, we just let them pick what they want to do. Now, we'll give them our advice and our counsel. Our category managers are experts in this, so they can give them fairly sound advice as to whether or not they're going to be successful with what they're planning, and give them suggestions and support on how they need to do it. But they will not have to compete with a Keith's product in order to get access to one of our retail outlets.
Okay, but they would compete with the other people in their category?
Technically they would from a consumer's point of view, but there's not enough of them at this point that they have to compete for space within our stores. Okay. As I said, we will take virtually everything.
Okay. Now, just in my last couple of minutes, just on the regulatory environment, have you had any discussions with the minister on changes that you would like to see to the Liquor Control Act?
On the regulatory side, the NSLC today is responsible for manufacturers and for retailers. So our aspiration, frankly, would be that we think that the manufacturing base might be better served elsewhere. them within our environment, one more degree of separation between us being judge, jury, and police. And so we would like to see potentially that change happen, and we have communicated that as part of our wish list, if I can say it that way. In terms of Liquor Control Act itself in general, it's a very big and long and multi-tangled adventure. So I'm not necessarily expecting a complete rewrite or rework of it in any way, and we're not suggesting that.
Okay. And just on my final quick question, just for the local producers, with all the data and statistics that you have in terms of presumably on their product sales and stuff, do they ever come to you for, like, if they want to try and list in another jurisdiction? Would you share data with them that would maybe help them show how their product sells?
We would, absolutely. We will, within reason, because there are some privacy and kind of contractual relationships we have with what we can share, depending on where that information comes from. But certainly, we're more than willing to offer advice and support, and we've done it and helped in the wineries, for example. We've been help facilitating Benjamin Bridge moving across the country, and we have done the same thing with Yoast, and we'll do it with the breweries as well.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll move on to the NDP Caucus for 14 minutes. Ms. McDonald.
Thank you. I'm going back to the agency stores for a moment, and I'm wondering if you can tell us how many of the agency stores are independents and how many are part of, let's say, the Sobeys chain, the Needs, or any other kind of chains. What's the breakdown in terms of those 60 stores?
Wow, that's a great question, and I don't have an answer for you, but we will get that for you.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. That would be great. I'm wondering if, I know that the government has announced, there was an announcement about a discount for restaurants in the wholesale product, wine and spirits, right?
Correct.
And so that is underway as of the 1st of April. Is that when that went into effect? Can you give us an update of where that is?
Certainly. The program actually went in place on January the 1st, 2014. I'll give a bit of background. The licensee community has been good partners of ours for a long time. They obviously are a key way of our product getting to consumers in a certain environment. They have been struggling significantly for many years, and I can tell you I've been here 9 years. I don't think there's been maybe 1 year in the 9 that they've had a positive sales growth in terms of beverage alcohol performance. They have become less and less a percentage of our overall business, so my expectation is that this year they will fall below 9% of total beverage alcohol. That's a significant change from where they are in a number of other provinces and where they have even been here. They've been as high as 16%, 17, 18%. And certainly there's lots of reasons for it, but it is what it is. The times have changed, and policy, regulation, all really good things. Drinking and driving and anti-smoking, all these things are very important, have certainly affected them and affected their selling of our product. So we were really hopeful that we could find a way to help these operators who were hurting quite significantly, and to see if we could help build their, at least their stability enough that they could perhaps rebuild from where they are. They are their own entrepreneurs. We cannot help them sell the product within their world. It's a different world. It's not our world. So we thought the best way that we could do it, if we could find a way to afford to inject a little bit of funds back into that community through some sort of a discount, if I can call it that, to help support them. And they had always, historically, they've been asking for discounts from, I think, all governments of stripe and color to help them and support them. And so we were able to work with them and find what was exactly they were looking for, and it was, again, primarily a simple approach, take away all the other fancy stuff that we do for them, and just give them a lower price of goods so that they could actually then operate. So we have done that, as I said, as of January 14th. We give them a 10% discount off the retail price, which is what they would normally pay, the retail price that an NSLC customer would pay before HST, 10% before HST, and file that back to them depending on how they buy through our warehouse or through the store or through one of our little centers, either a credit or an off invoice amount. So we have done that. The original gross cost was about $2 million to do that. After all the adjustments that we could make internally to all the other things that we were doing for them, we think the net impact is probably going to flow out somewhere around $1 million a year. And we've run it as a kind of a pilot program to let's see what happens. In our world, unintended consequences are a real and likely opportunity that we'll have to face. What actually happens with that? So we're going to run it as a pilot. There will be an assessment done at kind of the 2-year mark, and we'll see how it played out. But we're very pleased to do it. It's another one of those diversions away from net income going to the shareholder, though, that people need to be aware of. That our ability to continue to provide net income, even at a stable rate, while we're continuing to provide increased investments in these other channels for us, makes it very, very challenging. But we're pleased to do it, and it seems to have been very well received.
Excellent. It was, as you know, one of the initiatives that I had the privilege of being involved with moving along. And I was really glad to see it started, but I had forgotten that the time frame in which the evaluation would be done on it. So maybe we'll have a chance to get an update when it's more fully along and we can find out what impact that might have had on, I think, a sector that's really very important to provide support to. Which brings me to the buy local and the whole wine industry. And my question is around the Canadian scene and what's happening, opening up the borders to allow domestic wines from the various provinces to be shipped and moved. I know that Nova Scotia was one of the early adopters in making changes in its legislation, but that was really predicated on other provinces doing similar things. Where does that stand now? How easy is it for our industry to ship into other provinces and vice versa?
Okay, another great question. Where are we? Well, to be quite blunt, we're not very much farther along than what you were aware of in previous post. I can tell you that our approach has been to even be a little more flexible. So our recommendation, which is moving its way now, I believe, through legislation, is to allow it to happen without any contingencies placed on it or reciprocal arrangements in other provinces. So, the notion that you'd be able to, buy a case of Nova Scotia wine off the internet and have it shipped to your home by a courier is going to happen. And conversely, anyone who wants to do the same thing from a winery somewhere else in Canada will be able to do that as well. Across Canada, what's happening is obviously British Columbia, who were the stalwarts of that original initiative, they are wide open today, so you could make it happen if we wanted to. Manitoba is also wide open, so Manitobans can do it if they so choose. The rest of the provinces still have their barriers up, and my sense is that Alberta seems to be somewhat open, recognizing that in their environment they feel they're wide open as long as you go through their distribution environment. So they're kind of struggling, I think, philosophically with the notion of direct to home because it's not really a part of their model. I'm not sensing any degree of appetite in Ontario or Quebec, which is quite frankly where it all matters from that point of view. But that's kind of where we are today. In terms of barriers themselves, which I think is kind of the second part of your comment question, I actually think it's a bit of a red herring, the direct from 100% kind of Canadian juice, if I can call it that, as being the real barrier. I mean, the whole program, and I'm not suggesting in any way that the NSLC is against this, what we're about to do, because I think it is the right thing to do, and I actually don't think it's going to be material in the grand scheme of things in terms of wine purchases or in terms of net income. But it's also not really what the barrier is. I mean, the barrier on that whole process was really about those local wineries not having to share the profitability they make with corporations like ours. They wanted to keep all the profitability themselves. totally fine, and I get that, but it's not really a barrier, because you could always buy a case of wine from the Okanagan and bring it back with you. You just couldn't ship it by a courier. The real barriers in Canada are on commercial product. So we have a wonderful plant up in Truro, Peller Industries plant. They do a huge business with the NSLC and with our Atlantic partners, but they cannot ship any of that product into the province of Quebec or Ontario. Not allowed. They will not allow any of that product. You can't ship it into British Columbia either, who has been the big proponent of of the direct delivery or opening up of barriers. So that to me is really where the opportunity lies. If we're really interested in lowering barriers, it's on the commercial side, not on the local side.
I want to ask you a question about UVINs. When the new minister announced the regulations around UVINs, there was no fee attached to or a levy put on the product at the point of, I guess, production, I guess you would say, in the UVIN stores. And I know that other provinces, particularly Prince Edward Island, does have a small fee. So my question was that consistent with the recommendation from NSLC, who had been really active on this file, or not, that decision? Was that your recommendation?
Our voice was really more directed to what the impact was going to be on our net income stream, as opposed to the structure of how the new relationship would look. So whether there's a levy or not is really immaterial to us. How that levy plays out, whether it's a tax at retail or a tax at production, it doesn't really matter. Our biggest concern was just making sure that people were aware of what the impact would be down the road of having UVINs operate. And I also have to say that our perspective has always been that UVINs were going to operate. It wasn't a question of if and when, it was what would be the environment in which they would be allowed to operate in. So for us, we know that they're going to grow significantly. There's not much experience across the country, unfortunately, because there's not a lot of visibility into how it actually is performing. The only two provinces that have any visibility that I'm aware of is Prince Edward Island and Ontario. And in both of those, it's developed to somewhere between 15 and 20% of the total wine business ultimately will become from UVINs. So, in our world, that's we do $140 million a year in wine, let's say. So for easy math, say it's 10%, that's $14 million of wine business that will be done there. And with our markup structure, that's basically $6-7 million that will not be in the treasury at some point in time in the future. Now, how long, when that's going to play out, history will play itself out over time. But they're viable little enterprises. They're certainly popping up all over the place, and they're employing people, and they're doing what we always thought they would do.
So you'd prefer not to comment on your recommendations around any levy on that? Okay, I accept that. My final question, I must be close to the end of my time, yeah, 2 minutes, is around the social responsibility piece and any work that's occurring there right now with respect to, I know that's a part of your mandate, is also to be cognizant of the social responsibility side of marketing alcohol. Do you have any campaigns underway at the moment, or plans for any?
Yes, absolutely. The most recent campaign on the SR side, I hope everybody's seen it, is the karaoke cab that's running around Halifax and soon to be out to the rest of the province. It's a primary focus of ours about not drinking and driving, planning ahead, making sure that you get yourself home safely. And we've been doing these sort of campaigns for many, many years, and this one seems to be a real hit, to be quite frank. I mean, people are really seem to be taking to it. They're finding relevance with it. And we'll run this no longer as just a Christmas program. This whole notion of our anti-drinking and driving approach is going to be expanded to be a year-long foundation to what we do for drinking and driving. We also have been working very closely with the universities. We had our, I think as you'll remember, a Keep It Social campaign, which we launched in the universities 2 years ago. And they loved it so much, and they were an active participant in the design, really focused around anti-binge drinking and the potential impacts it could have, particularly within that environment. That the second year that we'd actually decided to revisit it, and they're taking a very active role and a much more of a lead role than historically would have been in the past. Historically, we would have done that work and then kind of dropped it in their lap and saying, what do you think? Now we've kind of turned that around and said, let's work with you, let's help us create and put a program in place that makes sense for you as places where young people are perhaps drinking for the very first time and we know are sometimes abusing alcohol. So we see those as big two parts of what we're doing, and we're going to continue to focus primarily in those areas right now.
Order. I've gone back to the Liberal caucus to conclude with questions, and Ms. Lonescroft.
Just two quick questions on the Air Miles program. You said that the reason is for tracking. Do your detailed receipts not give you enough information for tracking? What does the Air Miles program offer that our regular receipts do not offer?
What the regular receipts are a one-time thing. They're almost like what our SAP system provided to us. So the reflection that would come back from a transaction electronically as opposed to the paper receipt is what the transactional system would say. What Air Miles does, it will take that receipt and add them up over time and say, this is what happened in November, this is what happened in February, this is what happened in July, this is what this consumer of premium red wine is liking to look at throughout a longer period of time. So we can't connect the receipts, I guess would be an easy way to answer it. The Air Miles card number is the way we connect the receipts.
Okay. And how has the cost been for initiating the Air Miles program? Has it been cost effective?
Oh, incredibly cost effective. It's actually a profit center for us. So we're actually making somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 150,000 a year after all expenses, everything in. And that's a bit unusual for retailers who have been running these programs across the country. They tend to be some degree of cost that require a return on the investment. But our supplier communities to date have been very supportive of the program and investing heavily in it, and that's allowed us to make a little bit of money.
Okay, thank you.
On to Mr. McGuire.
Thank you for coming today. I'm just going to jump right into it. So if alcohol is placed in corner stores, would mystery shopping be more difficult? And with one staff usually manning the entire store, would theft become an issue in regards to stealing of alcohol?
Mr. Mitchell.
Wow. Again, hypothetical for me. I'll say that on the mystery shopping side, it's really a question of how much you want to spend and how much of it you want to do. So there's no question, we have 60 agency stores, 105 corporates, do the math, there's 165, we're mystery shopping them, plus the breweries and the beer store. If all of a sudden you have 1,500 convenience stores selling beer, it's going to cost a lot more money to mystery shop those stores, report them, manage them, feedback the information, train them, no question. In terms of theft, it's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure I can answer it for our own perspective, but I will perhaps share some information that I've seen out of Washington State, where they recently privatized their entire retailing environment. Really strange model, but with a much broader expanse of stores than they ever had with their corporate kind of government-run stores. And their incidence of theft, violent crime, student issues just went through the roof. Is it all attributable to this particular situation? I'm not statistically involved enough to know, but my sense is the more you have, the more difficult it is to handle. I will say that from our own experience, if you think of the very tragic situation we had here last year where and Mr. Cooper, an individual, was released from prison. Tragic story on both sides of the equation. I just cannot imagine being able to handle that kind of a situation in, call it 1,500 convenience stores. I just cannot imagine how you would stay on top of it.
So my other question around corner stores is if we did go to that model, who would be responsible for the training of the staff for guidelines and policies in regards to NSLC?
Well, certainly the program itself, what we expect would be our responsibility. The design of the program, the supervisory elements of it, the ownership of it. Having said that, I mean, who's responsible for it would be the owner and how that gets executed within their entrepreneurial environment of their own. Definitely, we expect these folks to be responsible and take ownership of it. We're there to help, to educate, to train, and then ultimately to monitor and feedback. But it would be, I would say ultimately it's their responsibility.
So there would be some financial and social impact to providing or allowing corner stores to sell alcohol, and what I'm getting from you is that it'd be difficult to control the situation with so many corner stores across Nova Scotia.
Well, we would definitely have to add, a much larger team of people to deal and manage and support 1,500 convenience stores. If you wanted to have the same degree of regulatory and responsible drinking oversight that we have today. And
my last question is, obviously there would be a difference. I would say the people that work at NSLC make a little bit more money than somebody working at a corner store. So what kind of economic impact do the NSLC stores have in local economies?
That's a very interesting question. We've never actually broken it down into a by-community impact. There's a couple of caveats we have to remember. These convenience stores, particularly the agency stores that we operate in, as I said, we require a 19-year-old or over to sell the product. There would be lots of convenience stores in the province that don't have someone of that age in it.
Right.
So, and that's one reason why our wage scales are significantly different. Within our own stores, not only are they 19 and over, they're also heavily trained in the degrees of things that we require, not just social responsibility, but product training and occupational health and safety, and running a store, and all the things that we do for customer service and satisfaction. So those individuals are certainly well vested in the communities, and they're contributing. They're doing all the things that residents do in those towns. So absolute number I don't have for you, but I can tell you that we have done an economic impact study as part of the view of the industry's total breadth and scope that we have, using the Department of Finance economic model, and the entire benefit just within our world, not including what happens at licensees and within the wineries world, or manufacturers world, is about 700 million for an economic impact for us.
And that's it for me, so I appreciate you coming out today. Thank you.
Okay, is there any more questions from the Liberal caucus before? Okay. I'll just want to give the opportunity for the witness to provide some concluding remarks if you so choose.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for the opportunity again to come and have a chance to explain where the NSLC is at and talk about the things that we're doing. I want to let you know that we have 1,450 very hard-working Nova Scotians that are doing their very best to give you the best retail experience out there. I'm very proud of the team that we have. The customer satisfaction and service scores and retail experience scores that we are delivering are through the roof, and that's because Nova Scotians are responding to what we're doing. And I have a wonderfully dedicated and focused team, and I want you to be very proud of them. Thank you.
Thank you. So the meetings next week will actually be held in the Legislative Committee office in the Johnson Building, as they're in camera, and that is December 3rd. So we're going to have the Office of the Auditor General and the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedures held. So if there is no other business, I'll now call to adjourn. Thank you.